Lean in. In the first 8 seconds, I need you to hear what the microphones didn't catch, the tiny click inside a man's throat when he realizes the courtroom isn't deciding truth, it's deciding ownership. That click happened in Seattle, in a room of polished wood and dead air, when an ex-wife named Grace sat like a stone for 3 days while a billionaire rewrote her life out loud. Everyone read her silence as surrender. That's how the system trains you. It teaches you to mistake volume for power, paperwork for morality, procedure for justice. But courts, every court, in every age, were built first as instruments of order, and order is just control wearing a robe. The ancient oath, the raised hand, the oath to tell the truth, is not a promise to God. It's a leash to the record. Once your voice is on the record, it can be cut, framed, replayed, and sold back to the crowd as reality. That's why the cruelest people love litigation. It isn't about being right. It's about forcing your enemy to live inside your story until they forget their own. Grace understood something men spend their whole lives denying: the arena is designed to drain your nervous system. Bright lights. Hard benches. The hum of air conditioning. A judge who can pause your life with a word. A lawyer who speaks like a surgeon and smiles like a predator. It's psychological warfare dressed as civics. And the audience? The audience is part of the weapon. They stare, they whisper, they decide who looks guilty before evidence even breathes. So Grace did the one thing control systems can't tolerate: she refused to perform. No tears to mock. No rage to edit. No confession disguised as explanation. She watched. She counted. She waited for a single hinge in the machinery, a question so ordinary it would sound harmless, but so precise it would force the empire to answer itself. Because there's an old rule in dark institutions: you can bury the truth forever, unless you make the powerful say the lie on oath. That's when the trap closes. And when the judge finally asked what he wasn't supposed to ask, Grace didn't raise her voice. She just opened the archive. On that drive, in that sealed envelope, was not revenge. It was a map of who pulled the strings, and why. You were taught the courtroom is neutral ground. That's the first lie they install in you, because a neutral man is easy to steer. Look at the architecture: the bench is elevated like an altar, the seal behind it is a modern sigil, and everyone stands when the judge enters the way peasants once stood for kings. That isn't tradition. It's conditioning. It reminds your body, before your mind can argue, who is permitted to speak and who is expected to beg. In older centuries, they didn't even pretend. The Star Chamber, the inquisitorial tribunals, the royal courts, each one was an industry built to convert fear into compliance. Same machinery, updated interface. Today the weapon is not iron cuffs, it's a process. Motions. Deadlines. Improper foundation. Relevance. A clean language for strangling truth without leaving bruises. And when a man like Howard walks into that room, he's not walking into judgment, he's walking into a system he has rehearsed buying. He wears the costume of credibility. He brings a lawyer trained to talk like certainty. He brings witnesses on payroll to create the illusion of consensus. That's not persuasion. That's social proof, the oldest psychological drug in the book. If enough people nod, the jury's spine goes soft. Grace saw it the first day. She saw the butcher lawyer slicing her into adjectives: unstable, negligent, bitter, because labels are easier to convict than facts. And the more she fought, the more she would feed him. There's a rule in hostile environments: every time you react, you donate energy to the one setting the frame. So she stopped donating. She became a blank wall. And blank walls make predators nervous, because predators need feedback to calibrate the bite. That's why the gallery started whispering. That's why the fiancé smirked. They needed Grace to play the role they assigned her: hysteric, liar, gold digger, the woman who lost it. If she performed pain, they'd call it manipulation. If she performed anger, they'd call it instability. If she performed logic, they'd call it cold. There was no winning inside their script. So she did something rarer than innocence, she chose strategy. She knew the only place the empire is truly vulnerable is the record, because the record is where power swears it's clean. And once a lie is sworn, it stops being gossip. It becomes a lever. Grace didn't come to court to argue with a billionaire. She came to make him speak the one sentence that would lock his wrists to his own arrogance. Silence wasn't fear. Silence was her hand on the trap, waiting for the wait. The most expensive weapon in that room wasn't Danton's voice or Howard's money. It was forgetting. Empires don't fall because the public learns a secret, they fall because the public remembers it at the right moment. That's why the first criminals in history weren't just thieves, they were editors. Rome called it damnatio memoriae, erase the name, chisel the face from statues, pretend the man never existed. The goal wasn't punishment. It was control of what your grandchildren are allowed to think was possible. The modern version is cleaner. No chisels. Just lost files, non-disclosure agreements, sealed records, and 1,000 tiny, clerical errors that always, mysteriously, benefit the same kind of people. And if you think that sounds dramatic, understand this, every institution keeps a private archive, and every private archive is a second government. The Vatican has shelves of it, intelligence services have warehouses of it, corporations have servers of it, and families like Howard's build their own, invisible, through favors and threats that never touch paper. Grace knew this world because she worked in its shadow, the business of recovering what powerful hands tried to delete. An archivist isn't a librarian. An archivist is a hunter of ghosts. She'd seen how a single recovered email can rewrite a war room, how a timestamp can turn a hero into a defendant. So when she married Howard, she didn't just marry a man. She moved into a living archive of corruption, passwords, burner phones, retreat centers that were really meetings, charities that were really laundromats, and a staff trained to testify like parrots. The system assumed she would be domesticated by comfort. That's the oldest agenda in the book, give a person luxury, and they will trade curiosity for convenience. But Grace kept her discipline. She backed up drives the way monks once copied forbidden texts, quietly, obsessively, knowing that truth survives only when someone risks carrying it. And here's the part most men miss, she wasn't collecting dirt to feel righteous. She was building leverage, because leverage is the language institutions actually respect. In court, innocence is a story, leverage is a mechanism. That USB wasn't a tantrum. It was an archive grenade with the pin already pulled, waiting for the judge to ask the one question that forced the lie into daylight. And once daylight hits, even the richest man discovers his money can't bribe time, only delay it forever. By the fourth afternoon, the courtroom had stopped pretending it was listening. It was merely consuming. Danton spoke the way priests used to speak in plague years, steady, hypnotic, giving the crowd a ritual to cling to. He didn't argue that Howard was good. He argued that Howard was inevitable. That's the trick of institutional power. It frames itself as gravity, then punishes you for not floating. Grace watched the judge's eyes, not the lawyer's mouth. A judge is not a philosopher, he is a traffic controller. Give him chaos, he closes lanes. Give him a single path, he lets you pass. So Grace refused chaos. She let Howard testify. She let him perform humility. She let him say, slowly and clearly, for the transcript, that there were no offshore accounts, no hidden wallets, no shell companies. Every sentence was a nail, driven by his own hand. This is where men lose nerve, because restraint feels like weakness when your blood is hot. But restraint is a blade. In old interrogation doctrine, the first step isn't violence, it's fatigue and narrative dominance. Keep the subject talking until he starts believing the story you're feeding him. CIA, Kubark Interrogation, 1963. Courtrooms do the same thing in daylight. They exhaust you, isolate you, then offer you one way out, agree with the version that keeps the machine moving. Grace didn't agree. She archived it. When she finally stood, it wasn't a plea. It was a filing. A drive in her palm, sealed under court procedure, timed to the minute. The bailiff carried it like contraband because truth, in these rooms, is treated like a weapon. The judge's curiosity sharpened. Boredom is the one mercy you can exploit. And then the hinge appeared, not a thunderbolt, not a confession, an ordinary question about an ordinary date. Where were you? Who was with the child? What happened before the report was written? Howard's face changed before his words did. That was the tell. Power always leaks through the body first. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked sideways, hunting an exit. Danton, the butcher, didn't object fast enough. For a man like Howard, the worst pain isn't prison. It's a loss of authorship. Answer wrong, and someone else writes his biography. Answer right, and the archive eats him anyway. That's the moment Grace had been waiting for, the second the Empire must choose which lie to die with. When the judge asked the question, simple, procedural, almost bored, the room didn't hear danger. But Howard did. Because men like him don't fear evidence, they fear the one kind of witness money can't seduce, time-stamped reality. In myth, this is the moment the king realizes the oracle wasn't poetry. In history, it's when a regime realizes the archive wasn't destroyed, only hidden. Grace didn't win by screaming. She won by letting the institution do what it always does when cornered, protect itself. Courts don't love victims. They love order. And perjury is a disorder that infects the record. The second Howard's lie became official, it stopped being a private sin and became a threat to the court's authority. That's why the judge leaned forward. Not because he suddenly cared about Grace's pain, but because Howard had insulted the bench with a confident lie. Watch how power punishes, it's rarely moral, it's territorial. Grace understood that, and she used it the way a disciplined man uses an opponent's momentum. The USB wasn't just files. It was a mirror held up to a machine. Bank statements with signatures. Shell names that sounded innocent. Audio labeled like a household artifact, baby monitor, the kind of banal object control systems ignore because they're too busy watching the obvious cameras. That's the suppressed truth hiding in plain sight. The elite don't get caught by dramatic conspiracies, they get caught by ordinary logs. Receipts. Timestamps. The boring little artifacts that don't flatter anyone's ego. And the deeper lesson is darker, this is how psychological control really works. They don't need to erase all truth. They just need to bury it under noise and make you too exhausted to dig. They make you fight on their timeline, in their language, under their lights, until you accept whatever outcome lets you go home. Grace refused the timeline. She refused the language. She waited for the hinge. Now listen carefully, because this is where the story stops being about one marriage and starts being about you. If you've ever felt the world trying to script you, media, bosses, family courts, HR rooms, community standards, the soft tyranny of polite lies, then do something right now. Comment this phrase twice, exactly, like a vow you're making to yourself, I don't forget. I don't forget. Not for me. For you. Because the man they can't control is the man who keeps the record, even when his hands shake. And once you become that man, the system has to deal with you differently. The recording ended, and the room discovered a new kind of silence, not the silence of a woman losing, but the silence of a machine recalculating. You think the explosion is the verdict. It isn't. The real blast happens after, in hallways, in calls you never hear, in favors exchanged like blood. Howard's first instinct wasn't remorse. It was containment. That's how institutional predators survive. They don't argue with truth, they smother it under procedure. They demand authentication. They cry, illegal. They drag you into technicalities until the crowd forgets what the audio made them feel. This is older than America. Medieval courts did it with Latin, empire courts did it with seals, modern courts do it with experts. The point is always the same: separate the fact from the emotion, and you can sell the fact as uncertain. Meanwhile, the press runs on adrenaline, not accuracy. They'll print the scandal, then quietly print the retraction when the check's clear. And while the public debates, the powerful move assets, rewrite contracts, call in regulators, and sacrifice employees as offerings to keep the core untouched. Look at Howard's ecosystem: a lawyer trained to butcher, staff trained to testify, a fiancé positioned as a human shield, companies nested inside companies like locked boxes. That's not romance. That's governance. A private state with its own courts, its own police, its own priests. And the darkest part? They weaponize children because children have leverage that looks like love. Custody becomes a hostage negotiation with better furniture. Grace knew the counterattack would come. She wasn't just exposing a man, she was provoking a network. So she did what the old dissidents did when the church and the crown shared a table: she made copies. Redundancy is rebellion. She sealed evidence. She timed disclosures. She forced the judge to own the question, so the system couldn't pretend it never asked. And if you're listening like a man who wants self-mastery, take this: anger is expensive. Discipline is cheap. Howard spent his life buying outcomes. Grace spent hers buying time and building files. In the next room, beyond the courtroom, there's always a boardroom, and beyond that, a narrative room. If you can't control your nervous system, you'll never reach either one. Because once you step there, you learn the final taboo: justice is negotiated, and the man who brings receipts sets the price for everyone watching. 48 hours after the cuffs clicked, the machine tried to heal itself the way it always does, not with truth, but with loopholes. A medical claim appeared, thin as paper and just as useful. A higher court accepted it. A bond number got typed. A signature got blessed. And Howard, who should have tasted concrete and consequences, was delivered back into glass and steel like a relic returned to its shrine. That's how you know you're not watching justice, you're watching influence management. Powerful men don't escape because they're innocent, they escape because the system is afraid of what their fall would reveal about everyone who benefited from them. So Howard rode home in silence, not humbled, but sharpened. He wasn't thinking about his son's cry. He was thinking about optics, stock price, the board, the next headline. Because to him, pain is a PR problem, and families are just smaller corporations with less regulation. He walked into his penthouse expecting the world to snap back into place, expecting the staff to resume worship, expecting the lights to obey. But the first thing he found was absence, the air too still, the closets hollowed, the safe open like a mouth with teeth removed. Betrayal, yes, yet even that was predictable. Parasites flee when the host starts bleeding. What mattered was the next door that wouldn't open, his own company. Access denied. 2 words that can unmake a man who built his identity on control. He called IT. He barked. He threatened. And then he heard the sentence no emperor is trained to survive: your credentials have been revoked. Not by the government. Not by a rival. By an entity with no face, no ego, no handshake, just voting power. This is the real dark history of modern empires. They aren't owned by kings anymore, they're owned by paper ghosts. Trusts. Holdings. Shells nested inside shells. Names that sound like weather systems. In the old days, the tyrant kept gold in a vault. Now he keeps authority in structures designed to make ownership unreadable to the human nervous system. Howard thought he owned 51%. He'd checked. That's what men say right before they learn they've been living inside someone else's design. Grace didn't take his money. She told the story of who built the throne. The angel investor he never questioned. The seed funding he accepted without curiosity. The fine print he considered beneath him. And in that moment, he realized the truth that breaks powerful men faster than prison: he wasn't the author of his empire. He was the frontman. And the quiet woman he underestimated was the one holding the ledger the whole time. Rain scraped the glass of the 40th floor as Howard walked into the boardroom expecting applause and amnesia. The oak table, the leather chairs, the panoramic city, everything was designed to make men like him feel permanent. But the room didn't rise. No smiles. No nervous laughter. Just directors staring at their tablets like altar boys waiting for the knife. Grace stood by the window in a black suit that looked like armor, not mourning. She didn't accuse him like a scorned wife. She introduced him like a liability. The acting chairwoman, she said, as if the words had always belonged to her. 55% of the voting shares. A number that turns a king into an employee. Howard laughed, because arrogance is a reflex, and reflexes get men killed. Then the documents hit the table, the trust addendum he never read, the Series A investor he never bothered to name, the chimera trust hiding in plain sight like a myth no one believes until it bites. This is how modern empires actually move, through paper ghosts. In Venice, the Council of Ten ruled by secrecy and dossiers. In Florence, families ruled by ledgers. In every age, the visible ruler was often just the mask. Howard had been a mask with good hair and better headlines. Grace had been the archivist behind the curtain, patiently tracing ownership the way monks once traced heresies. The board didn't vote on morality. They voted on risk. She showed the embezzlement routes, the shell company arteries, the emails ordering safety data buried. Not scandal, evidence. Not emotion, mechanism. And the moment the last hand rose, you could feel the institution do what it was built to do, preserve itself by cutting out the diseased organ. Security didn't look at Howard for permission anymore. The badge at the door wasn't a decoration, it was the next layer of the machine, regulators arriving like vultures that only circle once the smell is undeniable. Howard tried to speak, but he was speaking into a world where his name no longer opened doors. That's the forbidden lesson, power isn't charisma. Power is ownership, and ownership is often invisible. And if you think you're outside it, check your own life, your paycheck, your feeds, your loans, your reputation, each controlled by entities with names that mean nothing. The man who learns to read structure stops begging personalities. Grace didn't defeat Howard. She dissolved him in public. Howard's cell was not punishment. It was a demotion. Fluorescent light, concrete, the slow humiliation of being processed like every man he used to ignore. And here's the part you're meant to miss, institutions don't destroy a powerful man because they suddenly found a conscience. They destroy him when he becomes an uncontrollable variable. In that detention center, Howard wasn't paying for a broken arm. He was paying for becoming inconvenient to the people who once returned his calls. The network doesn't rescue you when you're bleeding, it steps back and measures whether your blood will stain their shoes. That's why his high-priced allies evaporated. That's why the apology tours never came. The machine loves loyalty until loyalty starts costing real money. Grace walked into visitation looking ordinary on purpose, no crown, no theatrics, because she understood another old rule, the most complete domination isn't loud. It's calm. She didn't come to gloat. She came to deliver a child's drawing like a death certificate for Howard's old identity. A superhero dog fighting a green monster. A kid's crayon truth that cuts cleaner than any attorney. Howard tried to bargain, of course. Men like him don't speak in regret, they speak in offers. Crypto keys. Hidden wallets. We can make a deal. That's his native language, transaction. But Grace had crossed into a different language, structure. She had company. She had custody. She had the record. And when she said she slept well at night, that wasn't a flex. It was a declaration of sovereignty, the one thing power chasers never buy because they can't invoice their own conscience. Listen to me like you're serious about self-mastery, this is what separates a man from a puppet. The puppet reacts. The man documents. The puppet argues. The man builds leverage quietly, legally, patiently. The puppet wants to be understood. The man wants the truth to be provable. Howard was still begging the old gods, status, image, fear, while Grace had moved into the realm that actually rules modern life, ownership, evidence, and timing. She didn't just escape him. She reclassified him. And as she walked out, leaving him to the world he built for weaker men, the message wasn't karma. The message was darker. The system will let you be a monster as long as you stay useful, but the moment your lies threaten the record, it will eat you alive and call it order. 1 year later, the city hosted a gala and called it a redemption story, because crowds need a clean ending. But endings are for men who stay asleep. The real lesson is what happened before the applause, in the dark space between a lie and a signature. Grace didn't defeat Howard with morality, she defeated him with literacy, financial, procedural, psychological. She read the system the way priests once read sins and generals read maps. That is forbidden education, because a man who can read structures stops worshipping faces. He stops fearing titles. The judge, the lawyer, the headlines, the boardroom, they are costumes. Underneath is a machine that runs on 3 fuels: attention, obedience, and records. Attention is what they steal from you all day. Obedience is what they train into you with shame. Records are what they hide behind until someone like Grace drags them into daylight. And here's the darker history hiding under this courtroom twist. Every era builds a sacred room where truth is declared: temples, tribunals, committees, platforms. The names change, the ritual stays. Speak out of turn and you're punished. Speak on cue and you're rewarded. That's psychological control. It isn't always evil, but it always favors whoever wrote the rules. Howard believed he wrote them. He believed money made him untouchable. He forgot the oldest rule of the empire: the scribe outlives the king. The one who keeps the ledger can erase you without ever raising a fist. So if you want a weapon that doesn't rust, take this with you. Keep your own archive. Save the receipts. Screenshot the promises. Document the patterns. Master your tone so you can stay calm while other men panic. Learn how contracts trap, how incentives corrupt, how narratives recruit bystanders. Not to become paranoid, paranoia is another leash, but to become precise. Because precision is what breaks manipulation. Grace walked out of courtroom 4B and the cameras chased her like she owed them a quote. She didn't. She owed her son a future. And she owed herself one sentence, the sentence every controlled man must eventually say: I am not the story you wrote for me. If you can say that, and mean it, you won't just watch Secrets. You'll start seeing the seams where power is stitched. And once you see those seams, you can pull, slowly, until the costume falls, and the men behind it have nowhere left to hide.